In this video, I upgrade the 335i with parts sourced from a diesel engine. So nothing's touching the charge pipe. I just need to figure out a mounting solution. Repair a major coolant leak.
And that's where we started leaking all the coolant.
Clean up some vacuum lines. Looking a lot cleaner in here. As you can see, you really don't see anything. And optimize the coolant system by rewriting the lines more efficiently than the factory setup. Let's get into the video. How's it going, guys? Welcome to the channel. Today we're working on the BMW. This is my 2007 BMW 335i with the N54 motor. It's an automatic transmission. I've had an issue with it that pertains to the inlet relocation kit that I had and the hose that runs across. I'll pop the hood and show you guys what I'm talking about. I got a sponsorship by ARM and they sent me out these inlets. And they actually sent me out their full bolt-on kit. So I pretty much got the whole ARM setup besides the charge pipe. This is an eBay charge pipe and blow-off valve. Other than that, everything is ARM when it comes to bolt-ons. Now with the relocated inlets, it comes with this bracket for the coolant reservoir because you have to relocate it. So what that means is you actually have to run the original coolant hose that is connected right here. You have to run it all the way across to here. So the issue that I was having one day, I was smelling coolant and you can barely see it down there, but that black hose right there actually has a pinhole in it because it was rubbing on the crank pulley. So long story short, I've had a coolant leak. I haven't driven this thing in probably a couple months, but I finally got everything to fix this and just really clean up the engine bay quite a bit. So this thing is gonna get its first start in about a couple months. I am a little bit worried because there is coolant on the belts. I don't want them to fall off, but I'm gonna go ahead and give it a start and hopefully we can back this thing into the garage. Starts up like a champ. It's got that new battery in there. Oh shit, it's already smoking. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and back it up really quick. You can see the coolant is just pouring out of this thing. It's leaking pretty bad. I didn't know it had that much coolant in it. Don't drink it, Moose. But anyways, back to what I was saying. So there is a pinhole leak there. I'm going to try to move some stuff around to try and make everything fit better. So the ARM kit is awesome. Everything fits pretty good other than the charge pipe here, which is aftermarket. The cap here kind of touches the hood, which I'm not a big fan of, but it's also hitting this blow-off valve a little bit, so it can't fully sit down. If you have the stock blow-off valve or even one of these with the diverter valves, or maybe even if you have the ARM charge pipe, everything here is gonna fit a lot better, I think. But that's not really the issue here. The main issue is the coolant leak. I wanna get that situated, but while I was getting the coolant all drained and everything, I wanted to get this all just kind of fitting better. So let me show you the parts that I got for this. So here's all the parts that I got for today's video. The main thing being the 335D, that is the diesel version of this car. It has a different shaped charge pipe here and it fits a lot better, especially when you're running the 335D coolant reservoir, which actually sits on the driver's side. So this one actually mounts up using stock mounting locations. The chassis and everything on the 335i and 335D are the same. So all of these are tapped, threaded and everything to be mounted in. We just had to find bolts for it, which I have a ton of those. Also got some coolant. Another thing that I got was this vacuum line relocation. This is the parts that it came with right here, these 3 parts. This is going to get rid of that vacuum line that runs across brake booster, I believe, some other random stuff, wastegates. It's going to route that underneath the intake manifold. I also got some miscellaneous stuff right here. This is a brass fitting for the radiator. It was cheap, so I thought I might as well get it. The OEM one is plastic. This is a blow-off valve spring. This is an 11-pound spring. I'm not sure what the one is in it currently. I just know that it's not opening when it's supposed to. I think it's opening very, very late. I also got these hose clamps right here. These are the OEM style. I forget what they call them. Are not the worm clamps, the one you use a screwdriver to kind of twist them. They always come loose. These ones look factory and they hold a lot better than those worm clamps. So like I mentioned, I purchased all this stuff from various different companies. The hardest thing to find was the 335D charge pipe. This thing is very hard to find in stock. I ordered it 3 different times. The first 2 times it got canceled. I ended up getting this from NP Boosted, I think, on eBay. They're the only ones that had it in stock. Came from Canada, actually, but we'll see how it fits up. Seems to be pretty nice quality, all powder coated, wrinkle black. welds seem to be pretty nice, all sealed up. So you can kind of see how this is going to fit up. It's going to sit about right here. You can see it's going to move this blow-off valve back, and it's actually going to give us more clearance for the coolant reservoir. It also is more of an S shape, so it kind of wraps around right there where that alternator is. Gives even more room for the coolant reservoir. For the coolant reservoir, got this from Rock Auto. I believe it's the Rain brand. You can kind of see how that's going to fit up as well too. There's already threaded holes, one right there and one right there, and it's just going to fit up way nicer. But anyways, let's go ahead and get to work getting this charge pipe and coolant reservoir out. As I take things apart, one of the things I failed to mention was why exactly I'm doing this. There are actually several reasons. One is so that I can have better fitment between the charge pipe and coolant reservoir, and the second is so that I can eliminate the coolant hose that runs across the serpentine belt. This hose is the one that comes in relocated inlet kits, and was the hose that had the hole in it caused by rubbing against the crank pulley. So I'm trying to eliminate that hose and completely future-proof any major coolant leaks like this down the road. Now I'm sure there is a good way to secure this hose so that it never comes in contact with the serpentine belt or pulleys, which brings me to my third reason for doing this, which is deleting any unnecessary lines. Now when I say that, I don't mean I'm going to block off the coolant reservoir from feeding the coolant system. That would not be good. What I mean is that I'm going to relocate this line so that it's shorter and not in the way of everything. It's going to make the engine bay look a lot cleaner and a lot easier to work on if I ever need to work near the front of the engine, like changing the serpentine belt. Managed to get everything out. You can really see how different the shape of this is. It's the same 3-inch piping, although it's just curved completely different to fit for this coolant reservoir. You can also see how the coolant reservoir is just slightly different as well. It's actually kind of the reverse of this one, and it is going to sit just like that. OEM, not touching the fender liner or anything anymore. Also, looks like this piping is gonna fit up just a little bit better as well because it was kind of getting notched up in here. Now I'm going to try to transfer everything over from the old charge pipe to the new one, which includes this blow-off valve. But before I do that, I want to try to put in this new spring. Let's see. That spring compresses quite a bit. See how long it is in this package. Let's see. We'll see. I don't know if this is going to make a difference or not. If it doesn't, I might just get an actual tile blow-off valve. Some of these bolts are really, really loose. They're not even tightened at all. I gotta put some tension on it. There we go. At first glance, this one seems really, really loose compared to this one. As you can see the thickness on it as well. This one's really, really small. I wonder what this one is actually set at. Looks like the seal around this is doing okay. New spring, which is a lot thicker. And let's see if I can compress this. I'll put a couple bolts in here. All right. I don't think there's any way to clock this. I think it's line it up with the old holes. Okay. That one's in there. All right, I still need to push it down a little bit more, but man, this spring is way tighter than the old one. And I didn't mention where I got this spring, but I got it, I think, for like $5 on eBay. Let's see if it works. I'm not really sure. I don't think it's an authentic tile spring, but I don't think tile blow-off valves make their own springs. I think they probably use them from various companies. This is an aluminum blow-off valve, so I'm not gonna cinch them down or anything. I guess I could throw some Loctite on them, but if they do come loose, I'll just tighten them. It's not a huge deal. All right, everything's tightened down. I'm gonna keep this old spring just in case. All right, I got it to compress a little bit. It's really hard to compress. And this little port up here, ARM actually sells these. It's a 1/4-inch vacuum line, like quick disconnect. It's pretty neat. If you guys don't have that, I would definitely get that. That's an awesome mod because you don't have to mess with hose clamps or anything. Got the hose clamp on. It's kind of hard to show you guys of me pushing this on because the O-ring just didn't really sit right, but I think it's going to seal. I think it's actually going to seal better because they didn't powder coat over that fitting. They also didn't powder coat over this, which I think they did that on the other one too. As you can see right here, they powder coated over this, which it's also wrinkle black, so it's definitely not a smooth finish. So I'm not sure how well that seal is actually sealing. I'll get this map sensor off. can see they not only powder coated along this flange here, they also powder coated on the inside of it. So this is definitely a cheap part right here. I would stay away from these if you're looking for a charge pipe, especially on eBay. Holy crap. Well, that's not gonna leak. It's actually not a mass airflow sensor. That is a boost pressure sensor, I think. Might be a map sensor, I'm not for sure. All right, everything is transferred over. Already got the new snap ring and O-ring in here. I'm actually gonna silicone this as well because that O-ring is incredibly difficult to put on if it's anything like the old charge pipe. All right, this thing is ready to go. Before I install the charge pipe, I need to remove the intake manifold to install the brake booster vacuum line relocation. I was hoping to be able to install it without removing the manifold, but it's going to be almost impossible. So I'll get this knocked out before I move on to the rest of the mods. So I was able to get everything off that I needed to install this vacuum line relocation kit. Got the intake manifold off, that's the main thing. That just gives us access to the vacuum pump down here and just gives us a lot more room to work. What made it really easy to get the intake manifold off was this bracket I made. I actually made this bracket about 2 BMW videos ago, but it's just a C bracket or an L bracket, whatever you want to call it, and it holds this thing. This thing is a pain in the ass to get off on the back because the bolts go in from the back side. You can't pull the intake manifold off without undoing those, so you have to take the throttle body out and just a bunch of extra stuff, and you got all these wires and stuff you got to like disconnect and all that. So I was like, screw it, I'm just gonna make a bracket, and looks like it's held up well. No wires have burned or anything like that, no arcing or anything with this. But that works good. I would recommend making one of these if you take off your intake manifold regularly. I'm also gonna do a walnut blasting at some point. But anyways, you guys saw that I took this vacuum line off right here. As you can see, it sits right on the top, and our new one actually relocates it and makes it go underneath the intake manifold so you don't see it at all, which is gonna make it a lot cleaner of an install. What we do have to do though is salvage some of these fittings, like this one that actually goes to the vacuum pump. I'm gonna have to pull that off. They have this fiberglass shielding on them. These lines go to the vacuum canisters, which go to the wastegates. Basically, they go to the wastegates. And we also need to salvage this fitting as well. So the way that you do these is you get a razor blade and pretty much cut along and just try to break the plastic line off. You can see it already spins just a little bit, so it's not seized on there, which is good. I just got this piece off right here that goes to the vacuum pump. I just looked at the picture on ECS, and actually you don't even reuse any of these fittings on here. So this piece can actually just go in the trash. And all that we need is this piece right here, it's a 90-degree fitting, and this piece right here, which is a 90-degree fitting. This goes to the vacuum pump, this one goes to the brake booster, and this one right here, this actually goes to the exhaust valve. There is a vacuum line that runs right here to here. I already pulled the line off of it. It was just a short little line. And that actually runs all the way back to the exhaust. And I believe it's an active exhaust. So whenever you put the car into sport mode or something, it turns that valve, so the exhaust is a little bit louder. I have an aftermarket exhaust and there's no valve on the car, so there's really no point in this vacuum line. I'm not sure if I'll get a code or anything for it, hopefully not. If I do, I could probably tune that out. Try to get these lines off. Gotta be careful not to scratch up the plastic fitting too bad. There we go. Managed to not even get a scratch on it. Okay, got that one off too. Now we're gonna need to cut a small piece off of this longer end right here that's straight, because we need to put this vacuum line port in. And I'm gonna put these like pretty much as close together as possible. So I'm just gonna cut about, I'll cut 1 3/4 inches just to be safe. Yeah, about right there. In the pictures on ECS Tuning, it actually showed they had another small section of hose, but for whatever reason mine didn't come with it. Or I guess now maybe the kit, you're just supposed to cut a piece of this.
but I already lined it up and it looks like everything's gonna be long enough. So I'm just gonna cut a little section off. Should be just fine. Now, when you look at this, there is 3 ports. So one of them is for the exhaust valve. So I don't know if I'll plug that because I don't really want to use it. But anyways, it's gonna go something kind of like that. And they give you these worm style hose clamps, which I already mentioned I'm not a big fan of. That's why I bought that big kit. So I'm gonna find some of these that match and we're gonna use those instead of those worm clamps. Put just a little bit of silicone on here so it slides on easier. Just like that, and I'll leave everything loose for now. Oh, we need one more. Okay, that's pretty loose right there. This one slides in really loose up here for whatever reason. All right, so I'll go ahead and mount this in the car how I want it, and then I'll go ahead and clamp all of these down. All right, plug it all in. Like everything lines up nicely. Kind of hits my bracket just slightly, but not a huge deal. Get this guy on. And I'm not really sure where to center these, but I don't think it matters a whole lot. I don't think it's going to interfere with anything. So I'll just keep it up where the logo is visible. Okay. Bam. Awesome. That looks pretty good. Let's make sure everything's tight. Yeah. These style hose clamps are just the best. That's why BMW uses them. Awesome. And looks like our vacuum lines are going to be a little bit short here, but the good thing is the kit comes with, I think, 1 meter of this hose. So not only will we be able to make these lines longer, we'll also replace them with some new hose. Bam, got all the lines replaced. Actually threw a couple of zip ties in here to kind of tie it with the oxygen sensor lines, and looks pretty clean to me. I just capped this off with a vacuum cap because I'm not going to be running that actuator line. It's also going to make it look cleaner without a line going across right here. I probably didn't need to, but I capped this one off as well, just in case I ever do reuse this line. But chances are I'll probably just remove it at some point. But anyways, I'm going to go ahead and put the intake manifold off and continue with this install. So now I got the manifold reconnected and looking a lot cleaner in here. As you can see, you really don't see anything. This is the line for it. I don't know if you guys can see that on camera, but I'm gonna go ahead and install this charge pipe. And from my experience, they're pretty difficult to put on, especially the aftermarket ones. So I'm gonna throw a little bit of silicone on the throttle body there so this slides on a little easier. Hopefully it just slides on. There we go. This one fits a lot better than the other one, except it's not really meeting up too well down here. So I might have to rotate it a little bit from the bottom, but I'm gonna go ahead and get our sensor plugged in. There's the sensor. Now we can actually shorten this blow off valve line. Just like that. And I think I'm gonna have to keep this over here. So I've been kind of playing around with different ideas on how I want to mount everything. The main thing being this power steering reservoir. Originally I had a bracket over here that connected like this with the ARM kit, which honestly looks pretty clean. And I like that idea, but the only issue is that the lines bind up with this charge pipe, and really the only way to get it to fit, because it's such a low clearance down in here, because the lines naturally want to run in between the frame rail and the charge pipe. If I have it running underneath this charge pipe, it makes contact and it won't allow it to sit all the way down like it needs to. It's not already fitting the best. I do need to rotate this bottom one so that it matches up with it. But anyways, I can't mount it over here. So my only option is to mount it somewhere over here. Looking at where the power steering reservoir was actually mounted on the 335 diesels, and it's actually mounted about right here. And that works out perfectly because it doesn't make contact at all with the charge pipe. So nothing's touching the charge pipe. I just need to figure out a mounting solution to mount it about right here. And a good thing about that as well too, and it actually wraps around the connection for the coolant reservoir. So it's not going to touch any other lines or interfere really with anything if I mount it just about right here, which I really like this idea. I'm gonna try to modify this bracket a little bit. It is aluminum, so I can't do any welding or anything on it. And so if I bend it too much one way or if it doesn't sit right, I'm gonna have to restart or find something different. If all else fails, I'll make my own brackets out of steel, but I'm gonna go ahead and try to mess with these brackets, try to get them fitting right, and then I'll get back with you guys. So I was able to do some magic, and I got this bracket actually fitting up pretty good. What I did was I actually measured the angle of this, and I bent it in a way to where it was sitting pretty good. The only issue was it was hitting right up here by the coolant reservoir. So you can see that little mark right there. So the good thing about aluminum, you can pretty much manhandle it and bend it pretty easy. Even with this bracket being pretty thick, I was able to move it to where it was pretty level. And now this will just slide right on just like that. And he'll sit perfect. I already measured it, and the hood should not make contact at all. There's plenty of room underneath it. And that's the beauty about this 335D coolant reservoir. It sits pretty low. It's not gonna make contact with the hood. So as long as this is lower than that, it shouldn't make contact. With the old setup, it was actually slightly hitting the hood somewhere. And I think it actually put a little bit of a dent in it. You can kind of see it right there. But anyways, I'm gonna go ahead and button all this up and we'll move on to the next thing. So now we're at the part where I'm gonna have to start rerouting these coolant lines. As you guys can see, I already got this mounted up right here. I just adjusted it down at the bottom. I got the radiator fan out as well, just to give me a little bit more room to kind of adjust everything. Already got the hose out there. This was the hose that came up to the coolant reservoir. And I'll show you guys where it was rubbing. You can see right there, just rubbing on the crank pulley. Looks like it might have been rubbing for a while, and it finally rubbed just like a pinhole in it. And that's where we started leaking all the coolant. This was the hose that used to come here, and then this would plug into the coolant reservoir. And then there's this connection right here for the heater hose that goes all the way back there. And so the way that you do this is you actually swap this flange, this single flange right here, with one that has two. And the one that has two is right there. So you can see there's two, and that actually goes into the thermostat. And the hose up there that's to the top that has the worm clamp on it, that is the hose that goes all the way up to here. So it just feeds into the thermostat. And this hard line right here actually feeds the thermostat as well. So there's really no point in having two up there. The only reason why there's two here, I think, is because the coolant reservoir used to sit at the top here, so it would feed the thermostat directly, which is probably the best thing for bleeding and coolant changes and everything. But really, you just need to tap it somewhere into the coolant system. The way that you do this is you remove this from the thermostat, and you'll cut that permanent clamp there. That's a permanent clamp. You'll cut that with a Dremel. And you'll pretty much swap out this 3-flange fitting here. With this one, you'll have to cut this one off as well. You'll just swap those fittings, and then you'll just use this existing hose and fitting here. We'll unbolt it from the ARM kit, and that will just plug in with the Y fitting up here. So these two will actually be tied into each other, and they will plug into the bottom here. So hopefully this works. I'm sure the bleeding procedure is gonna take a little bit longer because this is actually feeding into the top of the radiator now. Also, the hose starts at the bottom and then goes up to the top, so we'll see what happens there. Hopefully the pressure of this being up higher just kind of pushes the water down. That all plugs in and we seem to get all the air bubbles out of the cooling system. I'd say that this works. There we go. Got it. And there's our fitting and the clamp. All right, now we gotta do the bottom. I'll have to cut a little bit of this section anyways. And this is the fitting that we need.
I accidentally put a little bit of a pinhole on the inside of this hose here, so I went ahead and just cut off a little bit. Now, this is the hose that came off of the coolant reservoir, and it's a 90, and that is actually what this is a 90. So if this doesn't fit, I might just swap these, because I tried putting this up on here and it's kind of hitting other stuff. It really needs a 90, so I think I might just cut this 90 off of this one. Although I think it's actually facing the complete opposite way. There we go. Finally got this one on. Is really difficult. The fact that the hose is a little bit short made it really difficult, and also this really needs to be rotated a little bit because it's kind of like twisted. Hopefully this doesn't give me any issues. It's a little compressed right here. It really needs to be a 90, not a 120 or 45-degree angle, whatever you want to call it. So I wasn't really satisfied with the fitment up here. It was really hitting the top of the turbo outlet, is really touching it, and it was almost impossible to get off. I ended up finding a 90-degree fitting, and this is off an Audi engine, and it fits up perfectly. It's the correct orientation. The other 90-degree fitting that I have actually exits the opposite way, so it was up here, so it made no sense. And this fits perfectly. There's really no tension at all on this line. So long as the O-ring and the actual fitting is good, this should seal up pretty good.
These type of quick disconnect connectors are used in a lot of German cars for their coolant and oil lines. I wasn't able to find a part number for this connector, and it's actually proven to be a pretty rare connector to come by. Here's a similar image of what I used, but the larger end that extends here needs to be down here in order for this to be orientated correctly. What I suggest for people that are trying to do this is simply cap off the Y fitting with a 3/4 inch inner diameter coolant rated cap. It will make it a million times easier, and you won't have to cut off the permanent clamp like I did. So now that I've removed the hose that crosses over the engine, aka the hose that had the hole in it, I need to find a new spot for the coolant reservoir to feed the coolant system. This ended up being more difficult than I thought. I went through multiple trial and error, where my only difficulty was getting the coolant from the reservoir to actually drain and fill the coolant system. The way I had the hose running from the reservoir allowed for a big air pocket in the hose, and no matter how full I filled the reservoir, the pressure from the coolant system just couldn't push through. This is where I had to change my original plan. After fixing all my previous trial and error mistakes, here is my new plan. I'm going to tap into the lower coolant hose that drains the heater core for the HVAC system. Notice how I said drain and not feed. The upper HVAC hose feeds the heater core, which will only allow coolant to drain out of the reservoir if the heat is on in the car. So we don't want to tap into that one. To tap into the lower hose, I used a 1-inch outer diameter T-fitting made of stainless steel. If you use a 3/4 inch outer diameter fitting, it will be too loose. Next, I used this from an Audi. This has a 3/4 inch hose with a 90-degree bend and a straight coolant fitting, which worked perfectly. Here's the part number for the fitting. After connecting the fitting to the coolant reservoir and the other end to the T-fitting, I had myself a pretty good setup that allowed for coolant to flow properly out of the reservoir and bleed the system of any air bubbles. It also looks pretty good too.
All right guys, so I don't know if you can hear them, but the cicadas are absolutely horrendous right now. Just the past couple of days, they've just really been picking up and pretty much ear piercing, so you can't really hear me talk or anything. So I'm inside the vehicle right now and just going for the first test drive. Gonna see how this thing drives. Pretty excited to test out this new setup. I'm sure the blow-off valve is gonna be actually making some noises instead of getting compressor surge, or I might have messed something up and we might be getting more compressor surge, which I'll have to figure out something new with that blow-off valve. But anyways, that's probably the main thing. I think everything else is working. The new setup that I had with the coolant reservoir, it was bleeding a lot better. The first setup I had, I already described it, but it was not bleeding correctly. The coolant reservoir was just being full of coolant, and because of the loop and the angle of it, it wouldn't go back up into the radiator. So just keep that in mind for really any vehicle. If you're plumbing in a coolant reservoir, make sure that always goes down. If the line goes up at all, there's probably gonna be an issue with bleeding the coolant. And I know I mentioned it, but I haven't driven this thing in 3 months. I've pretty much just been driving my truck, and this thing is gonna feel like a rocket once it hits boost. But I'm gonna let it warm up a little bit. Looks like we just got a tire pressure warning, which is normal because I don't have TPMS sensors. But let's go ahead and take this thing for a drive. All right, so I got the car all warmed up. I'm gonna go for my first pull. Hopefully everything goes good. Second gear. I don't think that blow-off valve's going off at all. All I'm hearing is all of the excess boost coming out the intake on the right side, which the blow-off valve's on the driver's side. So I might need to look into getting a new blow-off valve because I've messed with that one so many times. I think it's just kind of getting old. The seals are all kind of seized up on it. Or it could just be a completely different design than the actual tile blow-off valve, so the spring is just not right for it. I just need to get a real tile. All right guys, so I wasn't able to get much footage because the cicadas just came out and they are super loud. They're all living in that tree right now, but they've kind of died down a little bit. It has been a few days since the last clip, but I went ahead and drove the car around and it's driving really, really well. No issues at all, no coolant leaks, no boost leaks, anything of that nature. And this is what it's looking like right now. Again, what I used was a fitting right here. That was from an Audi. I also used a 90-degree fitting right there. But I would say just get a bunch of different fittings from these. I think you can buy them pretty cheap on eBay or something like that. You could probably get them used as well. And then you can't really see it, but I did use a T-fitting down in there. Everything on this system works really well. It bleeds just the same as it would if the coolant reservoir was on this side. Bleeds just as fast. So I don't really see any kind of issue of running a setup like this. I think it just looks a million times better. And also it fits a lot better with it really not touching anything. None of this stuff is touching. The charge pipe is completely loose. I can pull that off easily without removing anything. Coolant reservoir, same thing, power steering. Nothing is in the way. I really like this setup. And then I did kind of fix that little hose that I cut right there. That was my original idea, was running the coolant reservoir to this. That was on a forum that I read, and unfortunately that does not work at all. It was not bleeding the coolant at all there. It was just sitting all up in here. The coolant reservoir really needs to be drained down. So if you're doing this setup, you know, you could do it a different way that I did, but I think this is the cleanest way. But if you're doing it for really any other system, always make sure that your coolant goes down, because as you can see, this right here where the line goes up, it's not going to bleed up there. It's actually going to be a big air pocket in there. It's just not going to bleed at all. But that's pretty much going to be a wrap for this video. Hopefully this helped you guys if you do have the relocated inlets, or you have a single turbo where the single turbo is on this side and you have to move the coolant reservoir or whatever. It's going to be the same situation. If you have any questions about hose sizes, fittings, anything like that, I'll try to respond as quickly as I can. Make sure to just leave them in the comments. But with all that being said, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.